What is up, you guys? Diggerdan here, coming at you with another video. Today, I'm doing a book review on Taltos, written by Steven Brust. So without further ado, let's dig into it. So for those of you who do not know, Taltos is book 4 in the Vlad Taltos series. You can kind of see right here, this entire shelf is by Steven Brust, and from the beginning to right before that purple is the first 4, which is where this one comes in. Now, if you haven't read Taltos series, I believe you can read them in any order, where, at least in the first 4 I've read, Vlad himself, Vladimir Taltos, is the narrator, and it's basically him telling the reader what happened. So again, I forget if that's first, second, third person, but in this case, it's not really spoilers because it says it on the back, but this is one where he has Journey to the Land of the Dead. So he works with some new friends that he makes, which is kind of weird because chronologically I think this book takes place even before book 1, or between book 1 and book 2, something like that, where, I don't know, there's some weird timeline shenanigans going on. But that's why, when in doubt, just read in release date order. That's usually what I go with. And it works out pretty good. And I think it helps lend itself to jokes, too, that Vlad tells. And like, it helps you understand the world better if you have the context of the first 3 books. Which I know are really novella size. So I know that the publisher has also released an omnibus for the first 3, and I think for 4, 5, and 6 as well. So that first 3 is called The Book of Jerrig, I think, and then the second omnibus is called The Book of Taltos. So take that with what you will, because I know my Aunt Teresa, when I first reviewed some of these books, she's like, oh yeah, I was looking for them on Kindle and I couldn't find them, but she could find The Book of Jerrig, which is the omnibus to the first 3. So if you're looking for the books, that's probably the easiest way to find them. Or if you're lucky enough, you can find them in the wild. Just anything Steven Brust, in my opinion, pick up. I've only read the first 4. I haven't read any of his other stuff. I haven't read The Broken Palace, which is a standalone, I think set in the same universe, or his other like Elven War saga. I forget exactly what it's called. But it follows some characters that are introduced in the Vlad Taltos, like some of the elves, or the Dragaerans, or whatever they're called. So yeah, anyway, I'm explaining this poorly, especially if you're a new-time viewer, and you know nothing about Steven Brust or Taltos. Yeah, basically, in the world, you're in the Elven Empire, even though they're called Dragaerans, but they're elves. And then Vlad himself is a human, or an Easternling, where his ancestors are from the Far East, where they have magic, but it's like witchcraft, where he can cast spells because he knows witchcraft, but it takes a long time because there's some setup, like you gotta burn candles and like sage, and like there's all these little things he's got to do, and like chant things, read from a book in some instances. So it really depends on what spell he's doing. Where the Dragaerans also have magic from like the Imperial Orb, I think is what it's called, where they can just like think of something to do and it just happens. So it's like teleportation is a thing through the elven magic, which is really cool. But when Vlad uses it, or people use it on Vlad, since he's an Easterner or a human, his body doesn't like it. So it's like there's an ongoing joke where it's like every time he teleports, especially if it's really quickly and he's not ready for it, then his stomach doesn't like it, and he has a weak stomach sometimes because of it. So he is at the butt of a lot of jokes from some of the elves because of it. So it plays off really well. And with that being said, so with that setup, Vlad is like a crime boss. He has his own little territory carved out in the capital city of this word. I don't know how to pronounce that. I'm not even going to try. But also he's an assassin. So he kills, not humans, but he kills elves, or the Dragaerans, for gold, and he makes a lot of money doing it. So, and this is one of the adventures. So, but he's helping some elves or Dragaerans do their thing, which he's kind of conflicted about. But it has a lot of great character moments in it. So, with that being said, my overall score for Taltos is 9.18, which is very, very high for me, because I like to say anything over a 5 is something I dig and something I enjoy, and then anything under a 5 is something I bury and something I just don't care for and don't recommend. So this, being a 9.18, is actually the highest rated Steven Brust novel, or book I should say, I've read so far, because Jerrig was an 8.45, and then Yendi, which is book 2, was an 8.65, and then Tekla took a little bit of a dip. I didn't love that one. That one was a 7.05. So I still enjoyed it, but there were just some plot things, like the story it was telling, I just didn't really connect with, and I felt like there were some things, whatever. I'm not here to talk about those. I do have reviews for those 3 if you want to go watch those. Yeah, anyway, that's all I'm going to say before I jump into spoilers. So yeah, if you don't want spoilers, click off now. If I've enticed you to go read the book, please do, and then come back and watch this review. If not, if you've already read the book, or if you're an animal and you just don't like spoilers or don't mind spoilers, let's dig into it. So if you haven't watched any of my reviews before, the way I review things is I just stole the old Tutor Rambler rating system, where there's 5 categories, and then you rate each category 1 out of 10, and then you take the average out of those 5 categories to get your overall score. So like I said, my overall score for Taltos is 9.18. But the first category I like to rate is emotional impact, and I rated emotional impact as a 9.5, which for me is very, very high. That is insane. So it's very good. Taltos is one of the most recent books, and one I can only remember in recent memory, that literally made me laugh out loud. But yeah, when Vlad and Lord Morlin, I think that's how I'm going to say it. It'll be here on the screen. But when him and Morlin are down in the land of the dead, and they're basically like dueling one-on-one some of like the dead Lord Dragons at a time, and then it's like Morlin does his thing, he does the first one, and then like the next one in line steps up and it's like, oh Vlad, it's your turn, and Vlad's like, oh really, we're doing this, okay. And then like Vlad acts like he's getting ready, and then just like flicks a knife in the guy's throat from a few feet away. He's like, yep, I did my part. And I don't know why, but that just made me bust out laughing. And then just all the dragons are just looking at him. Like, what? Like, what? Like, did you really just do that? He's like, I did my part. That was my turn. And I don't know why, but that just was so humorous to me. And that was a highlight. But just like the banter between Vlad and Loish is just so good all the time. Sometimes that makes it even funnier too, is that any conversations that the two of them have, it's in Vlad's head, because it's psionic or telepathic. I don't know the proper word for it. So it's in Vlad's head, so it's not like he's saying it out loud to Loish, and Loish, it doesn't speak using the air. So it's not like other people know what Loish is saying or what Vlad is saying. So it's like he can have jokes in between, like they're in the middle of a conversation with somebody, like Loish is like saying like, this guy's stupid, like how can he think that, like that was a very poor example, but just like stuff like that. You can just have a really good banter while having also a serious conversation at the same time, which I think is a very delicate thing to play with, which to me is just so much fun, especially when the plot moves so quickly for a novella-sized book when it's 181 pages. It's just crazy. And I'm really impressed with Steven Brust, with how much story he can tell with so few pages and so few word count compared to a lot of other big epic fantasy novels. And it just makes me wish that these were longer. Like, I know I have a ton of these to get through, and I have up to Hawk, which I think is like 13 or 14, but he also has 3 or 4 more out that I do not have. So I know there's more for me to get, and there's a lot for me to catch up on and read. But I'm partly taking my time because it's like once I'm caught up, then it's like, yeah, you can reread it, but I don't know, there's no new stuff, you know. So anyway, it was great. Yeah, so like I said, emotional impact 9.5, very high. A lot of that is because of the humor and the banter, but also because I actually felt like the stakes in the story were high, which is impressive because just having read the first 3 books and knowing the timeline and where this falls in that timeline, and knowing that Vlad obviously survives, but also like actually feeling like he's in danger for these events, and like seeing, oh, how is he going to get through it, or is he going to get revivified, like all these different things. But just to see what actually happens, but having that tension, even though like in the back of my head, knowing the tension shouldn't be there because I know he makes it through. Again, I think he's just masterful, and I think Brust does a really good job. And especially if this was like your first entry into the series, like you would be like, oh my god, is he gonna make it? Like, or if you did, unless of course you knew there were 17 other books or 18 other books that Vlad is in. But anyway, so emotional impact very, very high, and I loved it. So next is characters. That's the second category I like to rate, and I rated that as a 9.2, and that is also very high for me, and that partially is because Vlad is just such an interesting character for me. Him living in the elf or the Dragaeran Empire, who hate humans for the most part, hate Easterlings, and he's grown up in Dragaera, or the capital city, again, which I don't know how to pronounce the name of. And so he has never seen his homeland, or his people's homeland, and his only real influence, his own Easterling influence is his grandfather, because his own dad was trying to make him forget everything about being an Easterling, just so, like, because he bought a title to be in the House of Jerrig, which is the only house that lets people buy titles. And like his dad wanted to just be, we're of the Empire, we're Dragaeran, or trying to be as much as possible. But his Noishpa, I'm sorry, Vlad's grandfather is like the only positive Easterling influence on him, and that's how Vlad learned how to fence, like in the Eastern style, but also how to cast magic, or do witchcraft rather. But also because of Vlad's father, and since he bought that title of being in House Jerrig, that's how Vlad can also do magic using the Imperium Orb, or again, whatever it's called, I forget. So yeah, it just plays so well. And then again, just the banter between, like, or the relationship between Loish and Vlad is just so great. And then also Morlin, Lord Merlin of Castle Black, in Vlad, and just seeing how their relationship grows throughout the very short pages that they are together. Like how it's like Vlad doesn't really trust him, but he's starting to because he has to, but also because of the actions that Morlin takes to help save Vlad, and Vlad also doing in return, partially to save his own skin and to save him and Loish, but also just because he feels a slight obligation to Morlin as well, and just all of this playing in his own head. And yeah, it's just so great. And then I forget her name, but the one that is like a vampire or an undead that's in Zur Mountain that hires Vlad, I forget her name, but she's a very interesting character as well. And then her manservant, I forget his name as well. It'll be flashed here somewhere. He's only a very minor side character, but when he's on the page and doing little silly things that nobody notices but Vlad, I just think those are some great character moments as well. And then at the end of the book, when Morlin and Vlad save Morlin's cousin and like take her out of the land of the dead, and they actually escape, and like meeting her in, like, we met her in the previous books, but meeting her for the first time, or at least Vlad meeting her for the first time for real, like chronologically, was kind of a great moment. And like, okay, she's not a nice person. She is very stubborn. But again, knowing what I know from the first 3 books and sort of paying off now, it's just very interesting. So yeah, characters very high. Now, plot is the lowest thing I rated for this book, and that is an 8.7 out of 10, which is still very solid. But the reason it dipped a little bit compared to other things is because I feel like there were some things that happened in the plot that were maybe just a little too convenient, or maybe some like very minor things that really didn't make sense to me that I just kind of like pushed on or kept going and kind of pushed past. And the biggest one is when Morlin and, again, the other elven lady that hires Vlad to seal the staff and then go down to the land of the dead to save the soul, who is Morlin's cousin. And then it's explained that Vlad has to go down by himself because no one else would survive, but he most likely will survive because he's an Easterner, and he shouldn't be down there in the first place because it's the land of the dead for the Dragaerans, not for the Easterners. But then somehow Morlin gets wrapped up in it anyway, and he helps lead Vlad to the land of the dead. Like that, I didn't really understand. And explain, like, again, it's explained that Vlad's the only one that can do it because he's the only one that'll escape. But then Morlun was like, yeah, I'm like, whatever, I'm forced, I got to go with you. Which to me didn't make sense. But once that decision is made and once they're both down to they're together, and Vlad's like, oh, we're gonna help you escape, and then Morlun's like, no, like I expect to be stuck down here, and like these are the end of my days. It's done. It is what it is. And that just honestly that kind of showed great character for Morlun. But still, that decision, it's like kind of glossed over. It's explained that only Vlad, but somehow Morlun gets wrapped in it. Like that whole little bit didn't make sense to me. But yeah, something I did really enjoy about the plot, though, to not be so negative, is when, like with the epigraphs, with Vlad doing the witchcraft, and then at the end it's revealed that him doing that witchcraft this entire time, the little paragraph or couple paragraph snippets we got at the beginning of each chapter, was actually the spell that he cast to help him, Morlun, and Morlun's cousin actually escape the land of the dead, all three together, instead of just the two of them and leaving Morlun behind, was great. But also sometimes when the POV switches, I mean, it's still Vlad, so maybe that's not maybe POV switch isn't the right thing to say, but when it's like a time jump, and then when it's Vlad from the future or from the current present of the story being told, and then when it goes to him growing up and like flashback and like, oh yeah, when I was 17, I killed my first person, or like killed my first Dragaeran, and like all these things, like was great character moments, and learning more about Vlad made it really interesting. So yeah, anyway, plot 8.7. The fourth thing I like to rate is dialogue and prose, and I rated dialogue and prose as a 9.3 out of 10, which again is very, very high for myself at least. And again, the reason it's so high is just because the banter, I feel like, between Vlad and Morlun even, and Vlad and Loish, and just Vlad being snarky in general, just works so well, and it's just so humorous. And it doesn't feel forced. Like a lot of times, there's some authors that are trying to put humor in there, like Sanderson, for example. Lambast me if you want, but I think it's kind of well known that Sanderson's humor isn't always the best, and sometimes it's a little too on the nose. But the way Steven Brust writes it, it's amazing. Like, it's just so funny. Like I said, I had a literally laugh out loud moment, which normally I don't get. Sometimes I just get like a smile or like, oh, haha, yeah, or yeah, that's funny. Like, I recognize it's funny. But having a literal laugh out loud moment reading a book has never happened to me, or at least not that I can remember. So a book being able to do that, especially, again, I know, I keep saying how short this book is, but having such a high quality story in such a short number of pages, to me, is mind boggling. And that's why I keep coming back to Steven Brust. So I know it's been a long while since I've read one, but that's why I was so excited to jump back into it. So yeah, there's nothing really too negative to say about dialogue and prose, for the most part. I mean, there were some bits where things maybe went a little too fast, but that's probably the biggest negative I could say without being nitpicky. So yeah, dialogue and prose, 9.3. Now the last thing I like to rate is world building, and I rated world building as a 9.2 out of 10. For me, again, that's very, very high. And the reason it's so high is because it feels like a great lived-in world with a lot of history. And it's explained that the elves or the Dragaerans live for thousands of years, where the Easterners, just like us humans in real life, on like at the absolute maximum, usually have a lifespan of up to 100 years. So just having even just that difference from culture, like from species, but then also the cultural difference of, since they have such long lifespans, it's like they're not considered full adults until they're like a couple hundred years old and things like this, which I think is really interesting. And then again, the whole difference between the imperial magic and then the witchcraft, and then all just like the different mystical creatures. Like in Taltos, like in this book, we explore something that's not even part of the Dragaeran cycle, because if you don't know, that almost every title of a book in the Vlad Taltos series is one of the mythical creatures that is in the Dragaeran cycle, where after the Empress or Emperor dies, or gets removed from office from one house, then it goes to the next house in the cycle. So say it's the Jerrig, and then it might go to the Dragon, and then it might go to the Zur. I don't remember the actual order. Except, of course, for a couple books like this where it's just Taltos, where it's just his name. Um, but just having mystical creatures is really interesting. But like I was trying to get at, we explore or we visit or first encounter a mythical creature that isn't in that Dragaeran cycle where they don't really have a name. They're just like cat centaurs, which is just really, really interesting to me. Like, that's cool. Like, I've sort of seen, like, I know in like old Dungeons and Dragons, like monster manuals, I know like there's like sphinxes and things like that, and like there's a bunch of different creatures. But this is like the first time I've really encountered like a cat centaur, which I think is really funny, but also fun, and it actually plays to the plot too, where since they're going down in the land of the dead and with all these different gods that are down there, kind of reminded me actually of like Percy Jackson when he goes up to Mount Olympus and he interacts with the different Greek gods. But then when Vlad and Morlun actually interact with like the cat centaur god and like give her something that the cat centaurs gave them as like a gift or something, like it, so it helped assist them to get out. So it actually was plot relevant, which is really interesting. But that just really caught me off guard because I'm like, I knew the whole thing of like having the Dragaeran cycle and having all these different mystical creatures, but this is another mystical creature that's outside of that cycle, which makes sense if you think about it. But I was really thinking for whatever reason, it's like, okay, they have their normal animals, just like we do here on Earth and in the world, our normal world, but then just these extra mystical creatures that are in the cycle. So yeah, just things like that make it feel like a real living, breathing world. So anyway, that's my overall thoughts on Taltos. Like I said, I rated this as a 9.18. So very, very highly recommend. I definitely dig it for sure. So yeah, if you guys want more from me to read more of Steven Brust stuff, maybe jump away from Vlad Taltos and maybe jump into one of his longer length novels, I'd be more than happy to do that. Or if you just want me to keep doing Vlad Taltos, go on to book 5, which I forget the name of that one. I would love to do that as well. So thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please hit like down below. If you guys want to see more from me, Diggerdan, please hit that subscribe button as well as that bell notification icon so you guys know when I upload each and every single time. And I will catch you guys in the next one. Thanks for watching.